What happens when the galaxy's deadliest operative is sent to seduce a human, but ends up questioning everything she was designed to be when her target sees right through every technique she's mastered and treats her like a person instead of a weapon? This is the story of how one man's unbreakable integrity didn't just pass an impossible test, it changed the course of interstellar history. The library deck of the Helix station hummed with that familiar white noise of recycled air and distant engine vibrations. Captain Jackson Vonn sat alone among the holographic displays, lost in what looked like ancient Earth literature. He didn't notice her approach until she was already there, sliding into the seat across from him with the kind of fluid grace that made most species stop and stare. "Fascinating choice," she said, her voice carrying just the hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. "Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. Strange reading for someone surrounded by the vastness of space, don't you think?" Jackson looked up, meeting eyes that seemed to shift between violet and silver in the ambient light. The woman before him was stunning in that deliberate way that immediately put him on guard. Too perfect, too intentional. "Sometimes the oldest stories tell us the most about ourselves," he replied calmly, closing the projection. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been introduced. Isla Nerith, Valari Cultural Exchange Division." She extended a hand, and when he shook it, her touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "I've heard interesting things about you, Captain Vonn. Earth's first representative to the Galactic Concord. That's quite an honor." But 12 hours earlier, this conversation had been planned down to the last gesture. Commander Serena Cathera stood before the tactical display in her private chambers, her pale blue skin almost luminescent in the dim lighting. The Valari were known throughout the galaxy for their strategic minds, but Serena had earned her position through something far more dangerous: her ability to read the weaknesses in others. "The human integration protocols are proceeding ahead of schedule," she told the figure seated across from her. "Perhaps too quickly." Advisor Talon shifted in his chair, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned forward. "You suspect treachery already. The humans have barely been members for 6 months. I suspect nothing, but I prepare for everything." Serena's fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up Jackson's file. "Captain Jackson Vonn, age 34, military background, but his psychological profile shows an unusual combination of tactical intelligence and what their species calls empathy. He's already gained considerable influence among the newer coalition members. Influence that could be problematic if misused." "Exactly." Serena turned to face her guest fully now. "Which is why I'm assigning our most effective operative to conduct a thorough evaluation." The door chimed softly, and Isla Nerith entered with that same predatory grace she would later use in the library. She was beautiful, yes, but that beauty was a weapon forged through genetic enhancement and decades of training. The Valari didn't leave such things to chance. "You sent for me, Commander." "Ayla, perfect timing." Serena gestured to the holographic display. "I have a special assignment. Captain Jackson Vonn needs to be tested." Isla studied the human's image rotating slowly in the air between them. Strong features, intelligent eyes, but something else there too. A kind of openness that seemed almost naive by galactic standards. "What kind of test?" she asked. "The most revealing kind," Serena replied. "Personal, intimate. I want to know if this human can be compromised, if his loyalties can be redirected." Talon frowned, his concern evident. "Commander, with respect, using seduction as an intelligence-gathering method seems rather primitive. Surely there are more sophisticated approaches." "Sophistication is overrated, advisor. Emotion, desire, the need for connection. These are the oldest vulnerabilities in the universe. And according to our cultural analysis, humans are particularly susceptible to romantic attachment." Serena's smile was cold as starlight. "Besides, if Captain Vonn is truly as incorruptible as his file suggests, then he should have no trouble resisting Isla's considerable charms." Isla felt something twist in her stomach at those words, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Doubt, anticipation. She'd successfully completed dozens of similar missions across the galaxy. Why should one human be any different? "How deep do you want me to go?" she asked, her voice professionally neutral. "As deep as necessary to get results. I want to know what makes Jackson Vonn tick. His fears, his desires, his breaking point, everything. Serena's eyes fixed on Isla with laser intensity. The Galactic Concord is entering a delicate phase. New alliances are forming, old ones are shifting. We cannot afford to have unknown variables in positions of influence. And if he proves resistant to traditional approaches, then we'll know he's either exceptionally disciplined or exceptionally dangerous. Either way, that's information worth having. Talon stood his unease growing more apparent. I still think this is a mistake, Serena. The humans may be new to galactic politics, but they're not fools. If Captain Vonn discovers what we're doing, he won't, Ela interjected, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. I'm very good at what I do. And she was. That was the problem. As the meeting concluded and Isla made her way toward the civilian quarters where Jackson was staying, she found herself thinking about those words. Very good at what I do. But for the first time in her career, she wondered if being good at manipulation made her good at anything that actually mattered. The library encounter was set for 2100 hours, ship's night cycle, when humans were most likely to be relaxed, contemplative, vulnerable. She'd memorized his files, studied his psychological profile, even analyzed recordings of his speech patterns and body language. Jackson Vonn was a puzzle she intended to solve. What she didn't realize was that some puzzles change you in the solving. The library doors slid shut behind her as she approached his table, and Isla felt that familiar thrill of a hunt beginning. But mixed with it was something else, something that felt almost like curiosity. Not about the mission, about the man. To understand what was happening in that library, you need to understand the Galactic Concord itself. Picture this: 17 different species, each one evolved on worlds so different, they might as well be separate universes, somehow finding common ground among the stars. The Concord wasn't built on conquest or fear like the old empires. It was something new, a voluntary alliance where each species brought their unique strengths to the table. The Valari provided strategic oversight and intelligence. The crystalline Thyrians handled deep space navigation. The insectoid Khazari managed resource distribution with mathematical precision. And then 6 months ago came humanity. Earth's admission to the Concord had been controversial. Humans were young, technologically behind most member species, and frankly a little too unpredictable for comfort. But they had something that caught the attention of the Council: adaptability. Where other species specialized, humans seemed to excel at improvisation. Jackson Vonn embodied that human paradox perfectly. At 34, he'd already served in Earth's unified military, mediated 3 interplanetary trade disputes, and somehow managed to earn the respect of species that had been skeptical of humanity from day one. His psychological profile read like a contradiction: tactically brilliant but emotionally open, strategically minded but genuinely compassionate. The thing about Captain Vonn, one Therian diplomat had noted in a classified report, is that he seems to actually care about the outcome for everyone involved, not just his own species. It's unusual. Unusual was an understatement. In a galaxy where most diplomacy was built on carefully calculated self-interest, Jackson's apparent sincerity was either revolutionary or dangerous. Possibly both. Back in the library, Isla found herself studying those contradictions in real time. She'd been engineered for this kind of work, literally designed from birth to be the perfect operative. Enhanced intelligence, accelerated reflexes, genetically optimized pheromone production, and a psychology profile that made her naturally gifted at reading and manipulating others. The Valari didn't leave such things to chance. Their homeworld of Thyros was a place where evolution had been guided by intelligence for over 1,000 years. Every Valari was born with a purpose, their genetics tailored to serve the greater good of their species. Isla's purpose was infiltration and intelligence gathering. She could speak 17 languages, fluently fight with deadly precision in 12 different martial arts forms, and had been trained in psychological manipulation techniques that could break down mental defenses like acid through metal. But sitting across from Jackson, watching him discuss Hemingway with genuine passion, rather than trying to impress her, she felt something she'd never experienced before: uncertainty. You know what I find fascinating about that story? Jackson was saying, his hands animated as he spoke. Santiago loses everything. His fish, his strength, even his dignity in some ways. But he never stops trying. There's something profoundly human about that kind of stubborn hope. Stubborn hope. Isla repeated, tasting the words. Is that what brought your species to the stars? Jackson's smile was self-deprecating. Probably. We're really good at refusing to accept that something's impossible. He paused, studying her face with those disconcertingly honest eyes. What about the Velari? What drives your people? It was a simple question, but it hit her like a physical blow. What did drive her people? Perfection control. The systematic elimination of chaos and unpredictability from the universe. Efficiency, she said finally. We believe in doing things the right way the first time. Must be nice, Jackson said with a laugh. Humans tend to stumble around making mistakes until we accidentally figure something out. It's messier, but sometimes the accidents lead to discoveries we never would have planned for. Meanwhile, 3 decks up in the command section, Commander Serena Cathara was reviewing those same personnel files with the cold precision that had made her one of the most feared intelligence officers in the galaxy. Serena was what humans would call beautiful, but her beauty was the kind that came with warning labels. Pale blue skin that seemed to glow with inner light, silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, and eyes that could freeze a star. She'd been born into one of Thyros' most powerful families, genetically enhanced for leadership, strategic thinking, and what the Velari called necessary ruthlessness. At 143 years old, she was young by Velari standard, but already commanded respect throughout the Concord. Her intelligence network was legendary, her strategic mind unparalleled, and her willingness to make hard choices had prevented at least 2 interspecies wars. She was also, if you ask the right people in quiet corners, absolutely terrifying. The human psychological profile remains problematic, she murmured to her private AI assistant as she scrolled through Jackson's file. Empathy scores off the charts, but combined with tactical intelligence that suggests long-term thinking. Either he's genuinely as altruistic as he appears, or he's playing a game so sophisticated we haven't detected it yet. The AI program with Serena's own voice patterns but stripped of emotion responded immediately. Probability analysis suggests 93% chance of genuine altruistic motivation, 7% chance of sophisticated deception. Those 7% could destabilize everything we've built, Serena replied. Run a secondary analysis on Isla's mission parameters. I want real-time psychological monitoring. Advisor Talon Zareth represented everything the Velari valued about careful, measured thinking. At 208 years old, he'd served 4 different commanders and had a reputation for seeing political implications 3 moves ahead of everyone else. His concerns about the current operation weren't based on emotion or sentiment. They were based on cold, hard mathematics. Commander, he said, entering Serena's chambers without announcement, I've been running probability cascades on the human integration scenario. The numbers are troubling. Serena didn't look up from her displays. Elaborate. If Captain Vonn is genuinely as incorruptible as his profile suggests, and if he discovers our current operation, the political fallout could set back human-Velari relations by decades. The newer Concord members already view us with suspicion. Being caught manipulating their representatives would confirm their worst fears about our methods. And if he's not as incorruptible as he appears, then we need to know that before he gains more influence. But Serena, Talon paused, choosing his words carefully. Using Isla for this feels like deploying a nuclear weapon to test someone's reflexes. She's our most effective operative, yes, but she's also never failed to complete an assignment. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Serena finally turned to face him, and her smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. Then we find out which one was actually stronger. Amium, but down in the library something was happening that none of their calculations had accounted for. Isla found herself genuinely curious about Jackson's answers, not because they revealed weaknesses she could exploit, but because they revealed strengths she'd never encountered before. Tell me about Earth, she said, abandoning her planned conversation path entirely. What's it really like? Jackson's face lit up in a way that made her chest feel strangely tight. Chaotic, beautiful, Frustrating. Perfect. He gestured helplessly. We have a saying, home is where the heart is. I never really understood that until I left. Do you miss it? Every day. But missing something doesn't mean you regret leaving it behind. Sometimes the best way to love something is to fight for it from a distance. And there it was. The thing that made Jackson Vonn dangerous had nothing to do with deception or hidden agendas. It was sincerity so complete, it made everything around it seem false by comparison, including herself. For the first time in her carefully engineered life, Isla Nerith began to wonder what it would feel like to mean what you said. The ship's night cycle had settled over Helix Station like a gentle blanket. Artificial lighting dimmed to amber hues corridors, emptied of foot traffic, and the ambient sounds shifted to that subtle rhythm that encouraged rest and reflection. It was the perfect time for intimate conversations. Isla had chosen this moment with surgical precision. She'd spent the last 3 hours preparing not with makeup or seductive clothing, but with biochemical adjustments that most species would never detect. Her enhanced physiology allowed her to release specific pheromones that could influence mood and perception, creating an almost irresistible aura of attraction and trust. The library was nearly empty now, just Jackson at his usual table, and an elderly Thyerian scholar in the far corner, absorbed in crystalline data matrices. Perfect for what she had planned. You know, she said, settling into the chair beside Jackson rather than across from him this time. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about stubborn hope. Jackson looked up from his reading, and Isla made sure he caught the full effect of her enhanced gaze. Valari's eyes naturally shifted color based on emotion and intention, but Isla could control hers, consciously cycling through shades of violet and silver that most humanoid species found hypnotically attractive. She leaned closer, just enough that her carefully modulated pheromones would reach optimal concentration in his breathing space. The scent was subtle, designed to trigger subconscious responses of comfort and desire, without being obvious enough to raise suspicion. Have I? Jackson replied, and Isla felt the first flicker of surprise. His heart rate hadn't increased. His pupils showed no dilation. Even his breathing remained steady and controlled. Either Jackson had exceptional resistance to biochemical influence, or he was far more disciplined than his psychological profile suggested. About how humans refuse to accept impossibility, she clarified, shifting tactics smoothly. I find that fascinating. My people tend to calculate odds before acting. We prefer certainty. Certainty's overrated, Jackson said with that easy smile that seemed completely unaffected by her presence. Some of humanity's greatest achievements came from people who were too stubborn to pay attention to the odds. Isla tried a different approach, allowing her voice to drop to a more intimate register while maintaining eye contact that most species found difficult to break. What about you, Jackson? What impossible thing are you fighting for out here? She watched his face carefully, looking for the telltale signs of attraction and vulnerability that her techniques usually produced within minutes. Instead, Jackson seemed to consider her question with the same thoughtful attention he'd given their earlier conversation about literature. Peace, I suppose, he said finally. Real peace, not just the absence of war. The kind where different species can disagree without destroying each other. Where understanding matters more than advantage. There was something in the way he said it that made Isla's carefully planned response stick in her throat. He wasn't performing for her or trying to impress her. He meant it. That's very idealistic, she managed. Is it, or is cynicism just another form of laziness? Jackson turned slightly in his chair to face her fully, and suddenly Isla felt like she was the one being studied. I've noticed something about intelligent species, Isla. The smarter they get, the more convinced they become that kindness is naive and trust is dangerous. But what if they're wrong? The pheromones should have been working by now. Any normal humanoid would be showing signs of increased interest, lowered inhibitions, a desire to please and impress her. Jackson was discussing philosophy. Isla tried leaning closer, letting her hand brush against his arm as she reached for his data pad. May I? She asked, injecting just enough breathiness into her voice to suggest intimacy without being obvious. Of course, Jackson said, handing it to her without any of the nervous excitement she'd expected. She found herself actually looking at what he'd been reading instead of using it as an excuse for physical contact. It was a comparative study of ethical frameworks across different species, annotated with Jackson's own notes in the margins. His handwriting was careful, methodical, but the observations were anything but cold. "You've been studying Valari philosophy," she observed, genuinely surprised. "Among others, I figure if I'm going to represent humanity in an organization like the Concord, I should understand how our new allies think, what drives them, what they fear. And what do you think drives the Valari?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, and Isla realized she was holding her breath, waiting for his answer. "From what I've read, a deep fear of chaos. Your people seem to believe that if every variable isn't controlled, everything falls apart. It's not wrong exactly, but it's—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's incomplete." "How so?" "Because sometimes the most beautiful things come from the spaces between control. Jazz music, for instance, or love, or trust." Jackson's eyes met hers directly, and Isla felt something she'd never experienced before, the sensation of being truly seen. "You can't engineer trust, Isla. You can only offer it and hope it's returned." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they revealed weakness, but because they revealed strength she hadn't anticipated. Jackson wasn't resisting her techniques through discipline or suspicion. He was simply operating from a completely different framework than she'd been trained to manipulate. "That sounds dangerous," she said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous. The question is whether the risk is worth the reward." Jackson smiled, and there was something in that expression that made her chest feel tight. "I think understanding between our species is worth quite a lot of risk, don't you?" Isla found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided to respond. This wasn't going according to plan at all. Jackson should have been showing interest in her by now, should have been vulnerable to suggestion and emotional manipulation. Instead, he was treating her like an equal, like someone worth having a real conversation with. "Jackson," she said, abandoning her script entirely, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "Don't you ever wonder if people have ulterior motives, if someone's being nice to you because they want something?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those disconcertingly honest eyes. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Of course I do. I'm not naive, Isla. I know that politics is full of people who smile while they plan your downfall. But here's the thing." He leaned forward slightly, and Isla caught herself mirroring the movement unconsciously. "If I assume everyone's lying to me, then I become the kind of person who's not worth telling the truth to. And that's a lonelier way to live than I'm willing to accept." "But what if someone was lying to you? What if they were here for reasons they couldn't tell you about?" Jackson's expression grew thoughtful but not suspicious. "Then I'd hope they'd eventually trust me enough to tell me the truth. Because whatever they thought they needed to lie about, we'd probably find a better solution if we worked on it together." Isla felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking exactly but shifting. Like a wall she'd built around herself was developing its first hairline fracture. "You're very trusting for someone in your position," she said. "Trust isn't the same as stupidity, Isla. I can be careful without being cruel. I can be smart without being cynical." Jackson's smile was warm and completely without guile. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Someone takes advantage of my good nature. I've survived worse things than disappointment. And the best that could happen? I make a real friend, maybe even help build something better than what we had before." Isla stared at him, her carefully constructed persona crumbling around the edges. This man was supposed to be a mark, a target to be evaluated and potentially compromised. Instead, he was offering her something she'd never experienced before: respect without conditions, interest without agenda. "Jackson," she said quietly, "what if someone told you that respect and empathy weren't always enough? That sometimes you have to be harder, more calculating to survive in a galaxy that doesn't share your values?" "Then I'd tell them they might be right about survival," Jackson replied. "But survival isn't the same as living, and I'd rather live like a human than survive like something else." The words hung in the air between them, and Isla felt that crack in her chest widen just a little more. For the first time in her engineered life, she found herself wondering what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of that kind of unwavering decency. It was terrifying and completely irresistible. 3 days after their library conversation, Isla found herself standing outside the gymnasium deck at or 600 hours staring at the door controls like they might bite her. This wasn't part of her original plan. Hell, she wasn't even sure she had a plan anymore. But Jackson had mentioned during their second meeting that he maintained his fitness routine religiously, and somehow that had led to her suggesting they train together. Cultural exchange, she'd called it. Understanding how different species approach physical conditioning. The lie had rolled off her tongue so smoothly, she almost believed it herself. The gymnasium was empty at this hour, just the way she'd calculated. Privacy was essential for what she had in mind, though she was increasingly uncertain about what that actually was. The techniques she'd been trained in required close physical contact situations, where guards were lowered and intimate bonds could be forged through shared vulnerability. Jackson was already there when she arrived, running through what looked like a combination of earth martial arts forms. His movements were fluid but practical, more concerned with effectiveness than elegance. She watched him for a moment, noting the discipline in his technique and the way he moved like someone who'd learned to fight not for sport but for survival. "Morning," he called out, not breaking his rhythm. "Thanks for agreeing to this. I've been curious about Valari combat techniques since I read about them in the cultural briefings." Isla felt that familiar tightness in her chest again. He was genuinely interested in learning from her, not trying to impress her or maneuver her into a compromising position. "Our methods might seem unusual to you," she said, beginning her own warm-up routine. "Valari combat philosophy emphasizes precision over power, psychology over brute force." "Sounds like my kind of fighting," Jackson replied with a grin. "I've never been the biggest guy in the room, so I learned early that smart beats strong every time." They started with basic techniques, and Isla found herself genuinely teaching rather than manipulating. Jackson was a quick study, adapting her movements to his own style, with an intelligence that impressed her. But more than that, he approached the training with a respect that caught her off guard. When she showed him a defensive hold, he practiced it carefully, asking questions about leverage and timing, rather than using the close contact as an excuse to touch her inappropriately. When they moved to grappling exercises, his hands were exactly where they needed to be for the technique and nowhere else. "Like this?" Jackson asked, demonstrating a throw she'd just taught him. His form was good but not quite right, leaving him vulnerable to a counter. "Close," Isla said, moving behind him to adjust his stance. "But you're telegraphing the move. Here, let me show you." She placed her hands on his shoulders to correct his positioning, and felt something she hadn't expected. He relaxed under her touch, instead of tensing with anticipation. Most males of most species treated physical contact with an attractive female as a prelude to something else. Jackson treated it as exactly what it was: instruction. "The key is in the hip movement," she explained, guiding him through the motion. "You want your opponent to think you're going one direction until it's too late to counter. Deception as a tactical advantage." Jackson nodded. "I can appreciate that, though I have to admit I'm not great at lying." The casual admission hit Isla harder than any physical blow could have. Here she was, her entire interaction with him built on deception, and he was apologizing for not being good at it. "Sometimes deception is necessary," she said quietly. "Maybe, but I think there's a difference between keeping secrets and lying about who you are." Jackson turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "The first one protects information. The second one protects ego." They worked through more techniques, and Isla found herself paying attention to things she'd never noticed before. The way Jackson checked to make sure she was okay after every throw. How he adjusted his strength to match hers rather than overwhelming her. The genuine enthusiasm in his voice when she showed him something new. "Your turn," she said after an hour of instruction. "Show me some human combat techniques." Jackson's smile was self-deprecating. "Fair warning, human martial arts aren't as elegant as yours. We tend to be pretty direct about our violence." But as he began demonstrating, Isla realized there was something beautiful about the straightforward efficiency of human fighting styles. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes. Every technique served a purpose, and that purpose was survival. "This is called a clinch." Jackson explained, moving close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. It's designed to neutralize an opponent's reach advantage and create opportunities for close-range techniques. He guided her through the position, his hands gentle but sure as he adjusted her stance. And suddenly, Isla understood why her seduction techniques hadn't worked on him. Jackson wasn't attracted to artificial perfection or calculated allure. He was drawn to authenticity, to real connection between equals. The realization should have been tactically useful. Instead, it made her feel sick. Isla, Jackson's voice was concerned. You okay? You look a little pale. I'm fine, she lied, hating herself for it. Just thinking about the technique. Here, let's try it at half speed first, Jackson said, completely missing her internal crisis. Combat techniques are like dancing. You have to trust your partner completely or someone gets hurt. Trust. There was that word again. They continued training, moving through techniques that required increasing levels of physical intimacy and mutual reliance. And with each exercise, Isla felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. Jackson never once made her feel like an object to be admired or conquered. He treated her like a partner, an equal, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered as much as her appearance. When she demonstrated a particularly complex throw, he praised her skill, not her grace. When she struggled with one of his techniques, he adjusted his teaching approach rather than his expectations. You're a natural athlete, he said during a water break, genuine admiration in his voice. The way you adapt to new movements is incredible. Your people must have amazing kinesthetic intelligence. Isla nearly choked on her water. He was praising her mind, her abilities, her species' evolutionary advantages, not her engineered beauty or her carefully crafted persona. Jackson, she said impulsively, can I ask you something? Always. When you look at me, what do you see? Jackson tilted his head, studying her face with that same thoughtful attention he brought to everything else. I see someone who's incredibly skilled but doesn't quite believe it. Someone who's used to being underestimated and has learned to use that as an advantage. Someone who's lonely, maybe, like you're not sure anyone sees past the surface to who you really are. Isla felt tears threaten for the first time in her adult life. Not tears of manipulation or calculated vulnerability, but real tears born from the shock of being understood. Is that really what you see, among other things? Jackson's smile was warm and completely without agenda. I also see someone who's teaching me fighting techniques that could probably kill me in about 12 different ways, so I'm trying to stay on your good side. Shakku. The joke broke the tension, and Isla found herself laughing despite the emotional chaos in her chest. When was the last time someone had made her laugh without expecting something in return? We should probably cool down, Jackson said, beginning a series of stretches. Don't want to pull something and have to explain to Commander Serena why her cultural liaison is limping around the station. The mention of Serena's name hit Isla like ice water. Right. Her mission, her purpose, the reason she was here. She'd been so caught up in the genuine connection, the authentic respect, the feeling of being seen as a person rather than a tool, that she'd almost forgotten she was supposed to be evaluating Jackson for potential compromise. Almost forgotten that everything she was feeling was built on a lie. Isla. Jackson's voice was gentle with concern. You sure you're okay? She looked at him, this man who trusted so easily, who offered respect without conditions, who saw her as she'd never been seen before. And she realized with crystal clarity that she was about to destroy the best thing that had ever happened to her. I'm fine, she said, the lie tasting like poison in her mouth. Just tired. But as they finished their training session, Isla knew she was anything but fine. For the first time in her engineered life, she'd experienced what it felt like to be valued for who she was, rather than what she could do. And she was going to have to betray it. That night, Isla stood in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the polished metal wall, trying to recognize the person looking back at her. For 28 years, she'd known exactly who she was. Operative Isla Nerith, enhanced intelligence agent weapon of the Valari state. Her purpose was clear, her loyalties unquestioned, her emotions carefully regulated and controlled. She was a precision instrument designed for a specific function. So why did she feel like she was falling apart? The training session with Jackson replayed in her mind on an endless loop. Not the tactical elements or the physical techniques, but the moments in between. The way he'd looked at her when she demonstrated that complex throw, like he was genuinely impressed by her skill. The careful respect in his touch when he'd corrected her form. The laugh they'd shared that had nothing to do with manipulation or agenda. "This is ridiculous," she said to her reflection, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd been designed to infiltrate, to seduce, to extract information through emotional manipulation. Those weren't just her skills, they were her identity. Jackson was supposed to be another assignment, another target to be assessed and potentially compromised. So why did the thought of deceiving him make her feel physically sick? Her communicator chimed, interrupting her spiral of self-doubt. Commander Serena's face appeared in the holographic display, cold and precise as always. "Isla, status report." For a moment, Isla hesitated. In that pause, she could feel everything balanced on a knife's edge. Tell the truth about her confusion, her growing feelings, her complete failure to maintain professional objectivity, or lie to her superior officer and buy herself more time to figure out what was happening to her. "The target remains challenging," she said finally. "Captain Vonn is not responding to standard techniques." Serena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Elaborate." "He appears genuinely committed to his stated values. No obvious psychological vulnerabilities, no exploitable desires beyond his idealistic goals for interspecies cooperation." Ela chose her words carefully, walking the line between truth and deception. "He may require a more direct approach." "How direct?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Isla knew what Serena was asking. How far was she willing to go? How much of herself was she prepared to sacrifice to complete the mission? I need more time to assess the situation." Serena's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Isla had been trained to read micro-expressions. Disappointment, suspicion, and something else. Concern. "Isla, this is not like you. You've never required additional time to evaluate a target. Is there something you're not telling me?" "No, Commander. I simply want to ensure thorough intelligence gathering before proceeding to more intensive methods." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Serena nodded slowly. "Very well, but I want results within 48 hours. The Council is growing impatient with the human integration process. We need to know where Captain Vonn's loyalties truly lie." The connection terminated, leaving Isla alone with her churning thoughts. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether she was an operative following orders or a person capable of genuine feeling. She was still wrestling with that question when her door chimed. Jackson's voice came through the comm system, warm and concerned. "Isla, I wanted to check on you. You seemed upset when we finished training earlier." Her heart rate spiked. He was here outside her quarters, genuinely concerned about her well-being. When was the last time anyone had cared about how she was feeling, rather than how useful she could be? "I'm fine," she called back, her voice more strained than she'd intended. "You don't sound fine. Look, I know we don't know each other that well yet, but if you need someone to talk to..." Isla closed her eyes, fighting back tears she didn't understand. This was exactly what she'd been trained to exploit. Emotional availability, genuine concern, the human tendency to trust and connect. She could open that door, let him comfort her, use his compassion as a weapon against him. "Jackson, she started, then stopped. "I can't. Not right now." "Okay, I understand. But Isla, whatever's bothering you, you don't have to carry it alone. That's what friends are for." Friends. The word hit her like a physical blow. When had anyone ever offered her friendship without expecting something in return? She waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor before allowing herself to slide down the wall to the floor, finally understanding the full scope of her dilemma. Meanwhile, in the command section, a very different conversation was taking place. Advisor Talon entered Serena's quarters without announcement, his face grim with concern. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Serena didn't look up from her tactical displays. "If this is about the Isla situation, I'm handling it." "That's exactly what I'm worried about." Talon moved to stand directly in her line of sight. "Serena, you're treating a sentient being like a chess piece. Isla has served loyally for over a decade. She's earned better than being thrown into an impossible situation." "Impossible? She's one of our most skilled operatives." She's also never been assigned to a target like Jackson Vonn. Talon's voice carried a weight of years and experience. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles, and I think you're making a critical error. Serena finally turned to face him fully. Explain. Captain Vonn isn't vulnerable to the usual techniques because he operates from a fundamentally different value system. He's not driven by self-interest ambition or even survival instinct in the conventional sense. He's motivated by something we've rarely encountered in galactic politics: genuine altruism. No one is genuinely altruistic, Talon. Everyone has a price. Do they? Because from what I'm seeing, Jackson Vonn's price is the well-being of others. You can't buy someone like that. You can't seduce them with power or wealth or status. The only way to compromise someone like that is to threaten what they care about. Serena's eyes glittered dangerously. Are you suggesting we threaten innocent civilians? I'm suggesting that you're using the wrong tool for the job. Isla was designed to exploit weakness, but strength requires a different approach entirely. Talon leaned forward, his voice urgent. And more importantly, you're asking her to destroy herself in the process. Explain. Isla has never failed a mission because she's never encountered anyone who treated her like a person rather than an object. For the first time in her life, she's experiencing genuine respect, authentic connection. Do you understand what that means for someone who was literally engineered to be used? Serena was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You think she's compromised? I think she's becoming human, Talon said quietly. And I think forcing her to choose between her mission and her newfound humanity is cruel in a way that goes beyond tactical necessity. The mission parameters haven't changed, Talon. Then change them, or at least acknowledge what you're really asking her to do. Talon's voice hardened. You're not just testing Jackson Vonn's loyalty, you're testing Isla's. And if she chooses her mission over her heart, she'll never forgive herself. If she chooses her heart over her mission, you'll never forgive her. And if I recall her from the assignment, then we learn nothing about Jackson, and Isla spends the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Serena turned back to her displays, but Talon could see the conflict in her posture. There's a fourth option, he said quietly, which is trust her. Let her find a way to complete the mission without destroying herself. Isla is brilliant, resourceful, and completely loyal to our people. Maybe the question isn't whether Jackson Vonn can be compromised. Maybe the question is whether we're strong enough to accept an ally who can't be. Back in her quarters, Isla sat on her bed holding a small data crystal that contained her complete mission briefing. Everything Serena had told her about Jackson, all the intelligence they wanted her to gather, the techniques she was supposed to employ. She could complete the mission. She had the skills, the training, the genetic advantages necessary to break down Jackson's defenses. She could seduce him, extract his secrets, test his loyalties. But she would have to become someone else to do it. Someone who could look into those honest eyes and lie. Someone who could accept genuine kindness and return calculated manipulation. Someone who could destroy the first real connection she'd ever experienced. What am I? She whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in her engineered life, she didn't have an answer. 24 hours remained on Serena's deadline, and Isla felt like she was drowning. She'd barely slept, barely eaten, spending the time pacing her quarters like a caged animal. The data crystal with her mission parameters sat on her desk, taunting her with its simple clarity. Complete the assignment. Test the human. Report back with actionable intelligence. It should have been easy. It had always been easy before. But Jackson had changed everything, and she still didn't understand how. When she found him in the observation lounge that evening, silhouetted against the star field beyond the massive viewport, something inside her made a decision before her mind could stop it. It was time to end this, one way or another. Jackson, she said, her voice carrying across the empty space. He turned, and that familiar smile lit up his face. Isla, perfect timing. I was just thinking about our conversation yesterday about trust and deception. The irony hit her like a physical blow, but she forced herself to move closer. The observation lounge was private, intimate, with soft lighting that cast everything in warm golden hues. If she was going to do this, it needed to be now. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, she said, settling onto the bench beside him. close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that her enhanced pheromones would be at maximum effectiveness. Oh, Jackson's expression was curious but relaxed, completely trusting. Isla took a breath, calling on every technique she'd been taught, every weapon in her considerable arsenal. This was it, the moment when she either completed her mission or abandoned it entirely. Jackson, these past few days have been... She let her voice drop to that intimate register that had broken stronger men than him. They've been unlike anything I've experienced before. Tanawunduri. She placed her hand on his arm, letting her fingers trace patterns against his skin. Her enhanced physiology was working at full capacity, now releasing the carefully crafted biochemical cocktail designed to trigger attraction and lower inhibitions. I've never met anyone like you, she continued, leaning closer. The way you see the world, the way you see people, the way you see me. Jackson's expression grew thoughtful, but Isla noticed his heart rate hadn't increased. His breathing remained steady. Even her most potent techniques were having no effect. Isla, he said gently, what are you trying to tell me? This was the moment, the point of no return. She could retreat, make some excuse, preserve the friendship they'd built, or she could push forward and find out once and for all what Jackson Vonn was really made of. I'm trying to tell you that I'm attracted to you, she said, abandoning subtlety entirely. That I care about you in ways that surprise me. That when I'm with you, I feel like I'm seeing myself clearly for the first time. The words were supposed to be manipulation, but as they left her lips, Isla realized with horror that they were true. Every single one of them. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the starlight. When he spoke, his voice was kind but firm. I'm flattered, Isla. Truly. You're an extraordinary woman, and any man would be lucky to have your attention. Relief and disappointment warred in Isla's chest. He was going to let her down easy, preserve her dignity, while maintaining appropriate boundaries. It was exactly what she should have expected from him. But, she prompted, but I don't think that's what you really want from me, Jackson said quietly. Isla felt the world tilt beneath her. What do you mean? I mean that you're one of the most capable, intelligent, beautiful women I've ever met, and you're sitting here trying to convince me that you need my validation. Jackson turned to face her fully, his eyes compassionate but unwavering. That's not the Isla I've gotten to know. The real Isla doesn't need anyone's approval. She certainly doesn't need mine. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, Isla said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. Maybe. Or maybe you don't know yourself as well as you think. Jackson's smile was gentle, but it cut through her defenses like a blade. Isla, I don't need someone to admire me or want me or make me feel important. I need someone to trust me, someone I can trust in return. Everything else is just noise. The words hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Trust. The one thing she couldn't give him because everything between them was built on lies. What if I told you that trust was complicated, she whispered. Then I'd say that complicated trust is better than simple deception, Jackson replied. What's really going on here, Isla? Because this doesn't feel like attraction to me. It feels like desperation. Isla felt tears threatening, real tears, born from a pain she didn't know how to name. What if I told you that everything you think you know about me is a lie? Then I'd say that everything I think I know about you comes from watching how you treat other people, how you handle challenges, how you respond when you think no one's watching. Jackson's voice was steady, certain. You can lie about your past, your mission, even your name, but you can't lie about who you are at your core, not to someone who's paying attention. And who am I at my core? The question came out broken, desperate. You're someone who's been told her whole life that her value comes from what she can do for other people. Someone who's been trained to be useful instead of happy. Someone who's so used to being seen as a tool that she's forgotten she's a person. Jackson's hand covered hers, warm and steady. But you're also someone who laughs at terrible jokes, who gets excited about combat techniques, who looks at the stars like they hold all the secrets of the universe. You're someone worth knowing, Isla. Not because of what you can give me, but because of who you are. That's when she broke. The tears came in a flood she couldn't control, 28 years of suppressed emotion pouring out all at once. She'd never cried in front of anyone before, never shown weakness or vulnerability or genuine feeling. But Jackson's words had shattered something inside her that had been holding her together through sheer force of will. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, trying to pull away from him. "I'm so sorry, Jackson. You don't understand what I am, what I was sent here to do." But Jackson didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, offering his presence without demanding explanations. "Whatever you were sent here to do," he said quietly, "it doesn't change who you choose to be." "I was supposed to test you," Isla said through her tears. "Seduce you, find your weaknesses, report back on whether you could be compromised. I was supposed to break you." She waited for his anger, his betrayal, his disgust. Instead, Jackson was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "How'd that work out for you?" The question was so unexpected, so gentle, that Isla actually laughed through her tears. "Not very well. You're apparently unbreakable." "No," Jackson said softly. "I'm just lucky enough to know the difference between being wanted and being valued, between being desired and being respected." He squeezed her hand gently. "You never tried to break me, Isla. You tried to connect with me, and that's not the same thing at all." Isla stared at him through her tears, seeing clearly for the first time the man who had somehow seen through every defense she'd built, every lie she'd told, every mask she'd worn. He'd looked past all of it and found something worth protecting. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I was made to be," she whispered. "Then maybe it's time to find out," Jackson said. "Together." And in that moment, watching the stars wheel slowly beyond the viewport, Isla Nerith made a choice that would change everything. Not the choice her handlers had programmed her to make, not the choice her training had prepared her for. The choice to trust, the choice to be human. The summons came 6 hours after Isla's breakdown in the observation lounge. She stood outside Commander Serena's private quarters, knowing that everything was about to change. The data crystal containing her mission briefing felt like lead in her pocket, but she'd made her decision. Whatever consequences awaited her on the other side of that door, she would face them as herself. Not as Operative Nerith, not as a weapon of the Villari state, but as Isla. Just Isla. The door slid open before she could announce herself, revealing Serena's cold blue form silhouetted against the tactical displays that never seemed to sleep. "You're late," Serena said without turning around. "I was preparing my report." Isla replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Were you, or were you preparing excuses?" Serena finally turned, and her silver eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. 48 hours, Isla. That was the timeline we agreed upon. Your evaluation should have been completed 12 hours ago." Isla stepped into the chamber, letting the door seal behind her. "My evaluation is complete, Commander." "Excellent. And your findings?" This was the moment, the crossroads where she either returned to being the perfect operative she'd been designed to be, or stepped forward into an uncertain future as something new. "Captain Jackson Vonn cannot be compromised through conventional means," Isla said carefully. "His psychological profile was accurate. He operates from a value system that prioritizes collective welfare over personal gain." Serena's expression didn't change, but Isla caught the micro-expression of disappointment that flickered across her features. "And your recommendation that we accept him as a genuine ally rather than attempting to control him?" The silence that followed was deafening. Serena moved closer, her presence suddenly filling the space between them like a gathering storm. "That's not what I asked you to determine, Isla. I asked you to find his breaking point, his weaknesses, the leverage we could use if circumstances required it. Everyone has weaknesses, Commander, but not all weaknesses can be exploited without destroying what makes a person valuable in the first place." Serena's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Explain." Isla took a breath, knowing she was about to burn every bridge she'd ever built. "Jackson Vonn's strength comes from his integrity. If you compromise that integrity, you don't gain a controlled asset. You destroy the very thing that made him worth controlling." "And how exactly did you reach this conclusion?" Serena's voice had dropped to that deadly quiet tone that made seasoned operatives break out in cold sweats. "Through observation, analysis, extended psychological evaluation." The lies came easily, but they felt different now. Not like deception, but like protection. "Is that all?" Isla met her commander's gaze directly. "What else would there be?" Serena studied her for a long moment before moving to her personal terminal. Computer displays surveillance footage from Observation Lounge, 7 timestamp, 23:47 hours yesterday. Isla's blood turned to ice as a holographic display materialized between them, showing her and Jackson on the bench beneath the stars. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every word of their conversation, every moment of her breakdown, every tear she'd shed. "Interesting evaluation technique," Serena said coldly. "Very thorough, though I have to say your performance was somewhat emotional for a professional assessment." Isla's mind raced, looking for explanations, excuses, ways to salvage the situation. But as she watched herself sobbing in Jackson's arms on the display, she realized something profound. She didn't want to salvage it. "You're right," she said quietly. "It was emotional." Serena's surprise was barely visible, but Isla caught it. "Explain." "I got emotionally involved with the target. I compromised my objectivity and allowed personal feelings to interfere with my mission parameters." Isla straightened, meeting her commander's gaze without flinching. "But I didn't fail, Commander. I learned something far more valuable than Jackson's weaknesses, which is, I learned what strength actually looks like." Serena's expression grew thunderous. "The mission was to evaluate his vulnerabilities, not philosophize about the nature of strength. The mission was to determine whether Captain Vonn could be trusted as an ally or needed to be controlled as a threat." Isla's voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm telling you, he can be trusted. Not because he's weak, but because he's strong in ways our analysis didn't account for." "And what makes you so certain?" "Because he had every opportunity to take advantage of my vulnerability and chose not to. Because when I confessed that I'd been sent to manipulate him, his first concern was my well-being, not his own security. Because he sees strength where others see weakness and potential where others see threat." Serena moved closer, her presence intimidating but no longer overwhelming. "You've been compromised, Isla. Your judgment is clouded by emotional attachment. Or maybe my judgment is finally clear for the first time in my life." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Serena's expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been respect. "You're questioning orders, Operative Nerith." "I'm completing my mission, Commander Cathera. You wanted to know if Jackson Vonn could be trusted? The answer is yes. You wanted to know if he could be controlled? The answer is no. And you wanted to know if he represents a threat to Velari interests? The answer is only if we make him one." Before Serena could respond, the chamber's door chimed. Both women turned as Advisor Talon entered, followed by Jackson himself. "I hope we're not interrupting," Talon said smoothly, though his eyes were sharp with concern. "But Captain Vonn requested a private meeting with our intelligence division." Jackson stepped forward, his expression calm but determined. "Commander Serena, I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Serena's surprise was genuine this time. "Captain Vonn, this is unexpected. Is it because I've known since our second conversation that Isla was evaluating me for something beyond cultural exchange?" Jackson's tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. "The question isn't whether you were testing me. The question is whether I passed." Isla felt her heart stop. He'd known. He'd known all along and had never said anything, never used it against her, never made her feel ashamed of her mission. "You knew?" Serena asked, her composure cracking slightly. "I suspected. Confirmation came when I realized that someone as intelligent and capable as Isla was trying way too hard to make me like her." Jackson's smile was gentle but sharp. "Real attraction doesn't require that much effort. And yet you allowed the evaluation to continue." "Because I wanted to understand what you were really afraid of, and because I wanted to see if Isla would choose her mission or her conscience when the two came into conflict." Jackson turned to look at Isla, and she saw pride in his eyes. Pride in her choice, in her courage, in the person she decided to become. "Trust doesn't come from manipulation, Commander," Jackson said, turning back to Serena. "It doesn't come from leverage or control or the ability to predict someone's actions. Trust comes from knowing that when everything goes wrong, the person standing next to you will choose to do the right thing, even when it costs them. And you believe Isla made that choice? I know she did, because she told me the truth when lying would have been easier. because she chose to protect something real instead of completing something artificial. Jackson's voice carried absolute certainty. The question now is whether you'll make the same choice. Serena looked between Jackson and Isla, her calculating mind working through probabilities and possibilities. Finally, she spoke. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? Partnership. Real partnership built on mutual respect instead of mutual suspicion. You stop trying to control outcomes and start working toward shared goals. I stop pretending I don't know when I'm being tested and start trusting that your tests come from legitimate concerns. And if our interests don't align, then we negotiate like equals instead of maneuvering like enemies. Jackson's smile was warm, but uncompromising. The galaxy's big enough for multiple perspectives, Commander. The trick is making sure they're all pointed in the same direction. Isla watched this exchange with growing amazement. Jackson wasn't just defending her choice to trust him. He was offering Serena a way to save face while fundamentally changing the relationship between their species. He was, she realized, exactly the kind of leader the galaxy needed. And somehow impossibly, he'd chosen to trust her too. The silence in Serena's quarters stretched like a taut wire, each person processing the implications of Jackson's proposal. But it was Jackson himself who broke that silence with words that would change everything. I passed your test, he said quietly, his gaze moving between Serena and Isla. The question now is, can you pass mine? Serena's silver eyes sharpened with dangerous interest. You're testing us. Every interaction is a test, Commander. The difference is whether we're testing for weaknesses to exploit or strengths to build upon. Jackson moved to the center of the room, somehow commanding the space without dominating it. You wanted to know if I could be trusted. Fair enough, but I need to know the same thing about the Valari. Explain. Trust is reciprocal. You can't demand it without offering it in return. So here's my test. I'm going to tell you something that could destroy human credibility in the Conquered, something that could be used against us if you chose to weaponize it, and then we'll see what you do with that information. Isla felt her breath catch. What was Jackson doing? What could possibly be worth risking everything they'd built? 3 weeks ago. Jackson continued, his voice steady but weighted with significance. Earth's Colonial Defense Force discovered something in the outer system that changes everything we thought we knew about human expansion capabilities. Talon shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the gravity of what Jackson was about to reveal. We found evidence of a precursor civilization. Not just ruins or artifacts, but active technology. Dormant but functional. Technology that could give humanity a 1,000-year leap forward in space travel, energy production, and defensive capabilities. Mikram, Serena's expression remained carefully neutral, but Isla could see the calculations running behind her eyes. Information like this was the kind of intelligence that started wars or ended them. Why are you telling us this? Serena asked. Because the choice humanity makes about that technology will define our species for generations. And I believe that choice should be made in consultation with our allies, not in isolation. Jackson's gaze fixed on Serena with laser intensity. That's what trust looks like, Commander. Not the absence of secrets, but the willingness to share the ones that matter. The room was dead silent. Even the ambient hum of the station system seemed muted by the weight of Jackson's revelation. You realize, Serena said slowly, that information like this could be used to justify preemptive action against human expansion. Some species might view dormant precursor technology as too dangerous to leave in human hands. Yes, Jackson replied simply. That's why it's a test. Serena stared at him for a long moment, then did something that surprised everyone in the room. She laughed. Not the cold, calculated sound Isla had heard before, but something genuine and almost warm. You magnificent fool, Serena said, shaking her head. You just handed me the key to controlling human development for the next century, and you did it as a gesture of trust. Did I, or did I just give you the opportunity to prove that Valari intelligence is wise enough to know the difference between control and cooperation? That's when Isla understood. Jackson hadn't just passed Serena's test and created his own. He'd fundamentally reframed the entire relationship between their species. Instead of asking whether humans could be trusted, he was asking whether any of them were worthy of the trust they demanded from others. Serena was quiet for a long time, her calculating mind working through scenarios and possibilities. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. Advisor Talon was right, she said quietly. I've been using the wrong metrics for evaluation. Commander, Talon's voice was carefully neutral. I've been asking whether Captain Vonn could be controlled when I should have been asking whether he should be emulated. Serena turned to face Jackson directly. Your precursor technology discovery will remain classified at the highest levels, shared only with species who demonstrate the wisdom to handle such information responsibly. The Valari will not only respect your territorial claims, will help you establish protocols for safe research and development. Jackson's smile was brilliant. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me yet, because I have a proposal of my own. Serena's gaze shifted to Isla, and something in her expression made Isla's heart race. The Valari Human Cultural Exchange Program requires a new director, someone who understands both species intimately, who has demonstrated the ability to bridge differences rather than exploit them. Isla felt the room spin around her. Commander, you've proven something today that I didn't think was possible, Isla. You've shown that loyalty and conscience don't have to be mutually exclusive, that serving your people doesn't require abandoning your principles. Serena's voice carried a formality that made this moment official. I'm recommending you for promotion to ambassador. Your first assignment will be establishing permanent diplomatic protocols between Valari and human leadership. The words hit Isla like a physical blow. Ambassador, not operative, not agent, not weapon. A voice for her people, a bridge between worlds, a position where her newfound understanding of trust and respect would be not just tolerated, but essential. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jackson said quietly. Say yes and help us build something better than what we had before. Isla looked around the room at these three people who had fundamentally changed her understanding of herself and her place in the galaxy. Talon, whose wisdom had guided them through this crisis. Serena, whose willingness to evolve had made this transformation possible. And Jackson, whose unwavering integrity had shown her what true strength looked like. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. Yes, I accept. Serena nodded formally, but there was something like pride in her expression. Very well. Ambassador Nareth, your first official act will be to coordinate joint research protocols for Captain Vonn's precursor technology discovery. I trust you'll find ways to ensure that all involved parties benefit from the arrangement. I will, Commander. And Isla, Serena's voice softened almost imperceptibly. For what it's worth, I'm proud of the choice you made. It took courage to choose growth over comfort change, over certainty. Jackson stepped forward, extending his hand to Isla in the human gesture of congratulation. Welcome to the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador. I think you're going to change a lot of minds about what cooperation can accomplish. As Isla shook his hand, she felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. Not because of manipulation or design or genetic programming, but because she'd finally found something worth protecting that didn't require her to sacrifice who she was becoming. Together, she asked, echoing the word he'd offered her in the observation lounge. Together, Jackson confirmed. And as they stood there surrounded by the machinery of interstellar politics but connected by something far more powerful, Isla Nareth realized that she'd finally found the answer to the question that had haunted her for days. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. She wasn't just a tool to be used by others. She was a person who had chosen to build bridges instead of walls, to offer trust, instead of demanding control, to become someone worthy of the respect she'd never known she wanted. She was, for the first time in her engineered life, exactly who she was meant to be. 3 days later, Ambassador Isla Nareth found herself walking through the hydroponics bay, still getting used to the way that title felt in her mind. Ambassador, bridge builder, diplomat, person. The meeting with the Galactic Council had gone better than anyone had dared hope. Jackson's revelation about the precursor technology had been received not with suspicion or fear, but with the kind of cautious optimism that came from leaders who finally understood they were dealing with equals rather than unknowns. The research protocols were already being drafted, joint expeditions planned, cultural exchange programs expanded beyond anything the Concord had attempted before. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most to Isla, the space between the grand gestures and political victories where real life happened. She found herself drawn to the hydroponics bay, a place she'd never visited during her time as an operative. It hadn't seemed relevant to her mission then. But now, as someone tasked with understanding human culture, she was curious about this strange human tendency to grow things for beauty rather than just sustenance. The bay was filled with specimens from dozens of worlds, a living testament to the diversity the Concord represented. But in the far corner, she found something that stopped her in her tracks. A single flowering plant, unlike anything in the official catalog. The blooms were an extraordinary shade of blue-green that seemed to shift in the artificial light, almost as if they were bioluminescent. But it wasn't the unusual color that caught her attention. It was the fact that the plant was thriving in conditions that should have been hostile to most flora. Low light, minimal water, poor soil composition. Everything about the environment suggested the flowers should be struggling, dying, barely surviving. Instead, they were beautiful. "Jalara flowers," a familiar voice said behind her. "From the outer rim territories. Most people think they're impossible to grow in artificial environments." Isla turned to find Jackson approaching, carrying a small watering device and wearing that same easy smile that had first disarmed her defenses. "Jackson?" Her voice carried a warmth that still surprised her. "I didn't know you were a gardener." "Among other things." He moved to tend the unusual flowers with practiced care. "I started growing these about a year ago when the diplomatic assignments first began." Seemed appropriate somehow. "How so?" Jackson straightened, studying the blooms with something like affection. "Jalara is an old earth word from one of our dead languages. It means hope in darkness. These flowers only bloom when conditions are difficult. The harder the environment, the more beautiful they become." Isla moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "That seems impractical." "Does it? Or maybe it's the most practical thing in the universe." Jackson's voice carried that thoughtful quality she'd come to associate with his deeper insights. "Maybe the only way to create something truly beautiful is to find light in places where it shouldn't exist." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the flowers sway gently in the recycled air. Isla found herself thinking about the past week, about the impossible journey from operative to ambassador, from weapon to bridge builder. "Jackson," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you first realized I was evaluating you, why didn't you say anything? Why let it continue?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his attention apparently focused on adjusting the plant's environmental controls. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful but certain. "Because stopping it would have been about protecting myself. Letting it continue was about protecting you." "I don't understand." You were caught between who you were supposed to be and who you were becoming. If I'd called you out immediately, you would have snapped back into operative mode, completed your mission according to protocol, and never had the chance to discover what else you could be." Jackson turned to face her fully. "I wanted to see if you'd choose growth over safety, change over certainty. And if I hadn't, then I would have learned something important about the limits of trust. But I would still have treated you with respect, because that's who I choose to be, regardless of how others choose to act." Isla felt that familiar tightness in her chest, but it was different now. Not the painful crack of something breaking, but the warm expansion of something growing. "You took an enormous risk." The best things in life require enormous risks. Peace between species, trust between individuals, hope in darkness. Jackson's smile was gentle but uncompromising. "The alternative is living in a world where everyone's a potential enemy and every interaction is a potential threat. That's not living at all." And now, Jackson reached out gently, touching one of the Jalara blooms. It seemed to glow brighter at his touch, as if responding to the warmth of his presence. "Now we find out what we can build together. No hidden agendas, no secret evaluations, no predetermined outcomes. Just two people who've decided that trust is worth the risk of disappointment." Isla looked at him, this man who had somehow seen through every defense she'd built, every lie she'd told, every mask she'd worn, and had chosen to value what he found underneath. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. "I've never done this before," she said quietly. "Done what? Chosen to be myself without knowing if it would be enough." Jackson's expression grew impossibly warm. Then we'll figure it out together. No promises about where it leads, no guarantees about what we'll find, just the choice to keep growing even when the conditions are difficult. Especially when the conditions are difficult, Ela added, understanding flooding through her. Especially then. They stood there among the impossible flowers, two beings from different worlds who had somehow found common ground in the space between duty and choice, between what they were made to be and who they decided to become. The galaxy was vast and full of unknowns. Political alliances would shift, new challenges would arise, and the work of building trust between species would never truly be finished. But in that moment, surrounded by flowers that bloom brightest in darkness, Ambassador Isla Nerith and Captain Jackson Vonn made a choice that would echo through every decision they made from that day forward. The choice to trust, the choice to grow, the choice to find hope in the most unlikely places and build something beautiful from the raw materials of uncertainty and faith. And somewhere in the depths of space, in the quiet corners where real change begins, the universe became just a little bit brighter. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won through force, but through the courage to trust when everyone else chooses control. If you enjoyed this story of how humanity's greatest strength lies not in our weapons, but in our willingness to see the person behind the enemy, hit that subscribe button for more tales, where hope triumphs over fear and where being human means never giving up on each other. What impossible thing will you choose to believe in today?